Hello, and joining us on this episode of the Mortgage and Protection Podcast is Paul from Henchurch Lane, here to explain how the mortgage process works for self-employed dentists. It's great to chat with you again, Paul. How's it all going?
It's going very well, Tessa. Looking forward to this one.
Yeah, definitely. We're going quite niche, aren't we, here?
We are indeed. We
Hmm.
are,
Okay.
which I love.
Yeah, definitely. Let's see if we can help our self employed dentists out then. So, first of all, of course, what are the eligibility criteria for self employed dentists seeking a mortgage in the UK?
Sure. Okay, so for self-employed dentists, the core criteria are going to be very similar to other applicants,
Mm,
probably in the professional world, I'd say, or even in the employed roles. Lenders are going to be looking at income, credit history,
mm,
deposit, and overall affordability. And the key difference with people in this sort of category is the difference in how the income is actually assessed. So,
mm,
most lenders are going to want to see probably 2 years worth of trading history,
mhm.
either whether that be as a sole trader or a partner in some cases when you look at these sort of professionals, or a limited company director. So some lenders are going to consider, less than that. Maybe some lenders will look at just 1 year,
Mm.
particularly if you're a dentist and you've got kind of strong background in that profession, that can really help. So leaning more towards the experience and the sustainability of that kind of work.
Mm.
Um, so that's it in a nutshell, really.
Brilliant. Okay, that explains it. And you touched on this there slightly. We know that preparation is key. So, what
Yep.
documentation is required for self employed dentists when applying for a mortgage?
Okay, so the documentation for any self-employment is going to be a bit more detailed if you were to compare that to just your standard employed contracts.
Mm,
So typically lenders are going to ask for 2 years, which we did touch on.
mm,
That's going to be your tax calculation. So your personal income is going to be displayed on something that we call a SA 302, or a tax calculation. That comes with corresponding tax year overview documents. You're going to need to show business bank statements, personal bank statements, and your proof of deposit and your ID. So a lot of
mm,
that is standard stuff, but it's the more sort of self-employed evidence that is a little bit more technical.
mm.
If the dentist operates through a limited company, which can happen as well,
Right.
then the lenders are also going to want to see at least company accounts, and potentially even an accountant certificate or reference as well. So
Mm.
worth bearing that in mind if you haven't necessarily got a proactive relationship with your accountant. You're going to have to reach out to them just to give them the heads up.
Mm. Okay, so that is something again to be aware of, but there's your breakdown when it comes to the documents to have ready. Now, this next question ties in with that really. So, how do lenders assess the income of self employed dentists for mortgage applications? So, any other points to add here?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is where things can vary quite a lot. So for sole traders or partners,
Mm,
lenders are going to be usually looking at the net profit. Usually, if you are self-employed as a sole trader or a partner, on your SA 302, that's going to be labeled as profit from self-employment. So
mm,
that's the sort of figure that they're going to be focusing on. For limited companies or dentists that have set up via a limited company, it's a little bit more nuanced. So
mm,
some lenders can look at salary and dividends, which is your personal income, and others can actually consider salary plus your share of the net profit. So
right.
that's almost like your bit of your personal income and then the company performance, and the net profit within the business.
Mm,
That difference alone can really have an impact on how much someone can borrow as well. So it's really important that you're looking at the right lender for your situation.
yes, definitely. So, again, some key pointers there. Now, can you explain the concept of self employed mortgage affordability for dentists in more detail? That's interesting.
I certainly can. Uh, so affordability is essentially how a lender decides what you can realistically afford to pay each month, in a
Mm,
nutshell. But a lot of people assume that's kind of coinciding with what they personally perceive they can afford, and it's absolutely not. It's not to be confused.
mm,
Affordability from a mortgage perspective is never really looking at just your income in isolation. It's going to factor in things like your personal commitments, your business liabilities, your lifestyle spending, and also kind of the future sustainability, how that looks down the road a little bit.
mm,
So as an example, if you were to look at two dentists with a very similar income on paper,
Mm,
they might have a very big difference in how much a lender would suggest that they can borrow. And that can be because of how their income is structured, or it can even be because of how their income is evidenced.
mm,
So that those things are definitely important to be aware of.
mm. Yeah, so lots of factors involved there when it comes to affordability. Now,
Yeah.
moving on, we're getting through these questions. So, people would like to know, are there specific mortgage products or schemes available for self employed dentists? Now we're getting very niche.
We are, and this is quite it's important, and
Mm,
it's a good question. It's that there aren't really many products specifically labelled for dentists per se,
mm,
but there are lenders who are going to be far more flexible with professionals, people like doctors, nurses, dentists, those sorts of higher skilled roles that we're talking about. So
mm,
some lenders are going to be a bit more forward thinking when they take a view of the income, especially if in these kind of roles, a lot of the time there's a really clear career progression
mm.
or strong earning potential as you progress and as you're
Yeah.
more experienced. So they're the kinds of lenders that you sort of want to lean more towards because
Mm.
of their, let's say, more human approach to your income and how that's going to look in the future.
Yeah, which makes sense there. Now, I'm not sure how much you can say here, but
Hmm.
what are the typical interest rates? We always get this question, don't we? What
Yeah.
are the typical interest rates for self employed dentists looking to obtain a mortgage?
Okay. So, yeah, we'd never really start throwing rates around. It's going to be on a case by case basis, as you can imagine.
Mm,
It's also recorded at a certain time, and even tomorrow, the rates will be different. So, to answer that question, I think well enough, it would say that rates aren't really going to be determined by the fact that you're a dentist, or even actually by the fact that you're going to be looking at a self-employed application. The main
mm,
driver for what your rates are going to be is your size of the deposit, the credit profile that you've got, the
yeah.
loan to value that the product that you're on, and just the wider market in general.
Mm,
So a self-employed dentist with strong accounts, a good deposit, he's going to have access to as many rates as anybody else. It's
mm,
just a case of finding the right broker who's got the full access so that they can actually match you up with the most suited product at the time. And
mm,
if you approach the right broker, then you're just going to the outcome's going to be the very best rate for you at that time.
mm. Which is
Hopefully that
positive.
answers the question without,
Yeah,
avoiding the question,
it
if that makes
definitely
sense.
it definitely does. I was about to say it's positive really. So there's not really any differences if you are a
No,
self-employed dentist, which is a good thing. Um,
absolutely.
yeah. Okay, so let's see what we have next. Are there any additional challenges or considerations for self-employed dentists when obtaining a mortgage? These are quite long questions, aren't they?
They are. Dentists are very wordy.
They are.
But
It's
yeah,
all about
I
the
suppose the
teeth.
biggest it's the biggest challenge usually is going to come down to how their income is structured. So, as an example, many dentists that we work with
Hmm.
are, how do I word this, tax efficient, which is great from an accounting perspective,
Hmm.
but it can reduce the income that we're left with as a broker to use towards the affordability and how much the lenders can put towards that too. So
Hmm.
it can have an impact. We'll probably touch on that a little bit later in terms of advice and things that you could look at to better your
Hmm.
options. But another
Yeah.
challenge that we see with a lot of self-employed people, including dentists, is fluctuating income. So especially if you're maybe an associate dentist or you're in the early years of self-employment, we,
Hmm.
we tend to find that kind of roller coaster of income or even seasonal stuff has quite a big impact on people's situations. So
Hmm.
it's worth having a chat not only with your broker but even getting them on the call with your accountant to kind of structure things in the best light
Hmm.
for both arguments.
Okay, so a good top tip there, but actually you're ahead of the game, Paul, because
I know,
you are. Because the next
as
question
always.
asks, I know, are there any specific tax implications or advantages for self-employed dentists when applying for a mortgage? But again, I'm not sure how much you can actually expand on here.
Yeah, so obviously I can't give tax advice, but there,
Mm,
there won't be any direct tax advantages to being a dentist or when you're applying for a mortgage. Not if we're sort of talking in a residential sense.
mm,
If there were tax advantages for something like an investment property, that would be more on your buy to let, and that would be across the board, not just for dentists. It would just be for self-employed people.
Mm,
Tax planning, however, being forthcoming and looking down the road with regards to your retentions can have an indirect impact, I suppose. So,
mm,
an example of that would be if a dentist reduces their taxable income to minimize tax, which we kind of touched on in the previous question,
mm,
that's also going to reduce the income that the lender is going to be willing to use. So it's often about sort of finding the right balance between being really tax efficient and what your borrowing intentions are,
mm,
depending on your future plans. So looking ahead, rather than looking at what's going to work best for
mm,
you right now.
mm. Preparation is key, isn't it? We say it all the time.
Yes, it's the 7 Ps, Tessa.
Oh, yes, there
Prior
we go.
planning and preparation prevents piss poor performance. There you go.
Oh, well remembered there. There you go.
Yeah,
If you take anything away, take that away. Um,
take the 7 Ps.
take the 7 Ps. Right, we'll move on. Well, we've got 2 questions left, but we will actually be back with a part 2. There's more questions to cover. But
Yeah.
let's look at what we have here. So again, we probably touched on this, but how do self-employed dentists demonstrate their financial stability to lenders?
Yeah, okay. So, like a lot of things in life, consistency is really key here. So, lenders are really focusing on the stability
Mm,
of the income. Is the income increasing over time? Is it reducing? That's going to be a big factor. A well-run business that they're looking to lend to people that they have faith that are going to continue to pay and repay the debts that they've got.
mm,
Clean banking conduct. So if you're looking at your accounts and you're constantly going over your overdraft and there's sort of hints and signs that you're not necessarily on top of managing your money, then that's going to have
mm,
an impact on kind of the bigger picture. And then if you are obviously self-employed as a dentist, having those submissions to HMRC all up to date, all of your taxes paid on time, those sorts of things are just going to add to the case and
mm.
how a lender looks to or an underwriter views you overall, really.
Yeah.
A good accountant is key. They're generally going to prompt you. People in these roles are, as we know,
Mm,
any kind of professional in healthcare in general are going to be flat out all the time.
yeah.
They've got very little time to spend on their life admin as such. So having
Yeah.
these kind of key people around you in certain areas is going to really help you just maintain um, the status quo with your finances.
Mm. Yes, definitely. Lots of pointers there. Some good top tips again. So,
Absolutely.
just lastly for this episode, are there any differences in the mortgage process for newly qualified self employed dentists compared to experienced practitioners? That's a good one.
Yeah, there can be. I think maybe the way that the question's been asked, the answer probably doesn't directly link to that. But
Mm,
as an example of someone in the sort of earlier years, a newly self-employed dentist, they're going to have less trading history, which is going to limit the options that they've got access to.
mm,
Um, but again, what we mentioned earlier, if you've moved from an employed role within dentistry into self-employment, some lenders are going to take that career progression and the history into account.
mm,
Um, Whereas experienced practitioners with multiple years of accounts, they're generally going to have more options, potentially because they've been going for longer. Have they got a higher income? Have they got a bigger net profit? And that's going to
mm,
increase their borrowing capacity as a result as well. So those are the sorts of things that are going to drive the outcomes rather than, um, you know, is it bad that I've just started in dentistry, or is it
mm.
better if I've been in for a couple of years? It's those sorts of questions that the lenders are going to ask.
Yeah. Okay. Which hopefully that sounds reassuring if you are new to
Yeah.
this, but some
it,
good
it can
points
be
as well.
daunting when you start out in a business. Everybody's going to be worried about how that's
Yeah.
going to pan out.
Yeah.
You don't need on top of that, am I going to struggle to get a mortgage forever, and how long is that
Mm,
going to take? There are options outside of the norm, but everything we've touched on today, if you follow those guidelines, it shouldn't be as big a problem as some people might anticipate.
mm. Brilliant. That's great news. Now we've covered all of the main questions for our part 1 episode. Is there anything else to add, or should we meet back on our part 2 episode?
Let's go for part two.
Yeah?
Let's do it.
All right. I'll catch you there.